ancient and whatever. There's no record of that anyway. Then again, records are easily destroyed and lost and whatnot. So just because there isn't a record of something doesn't make it not true. But the fact that certain people believe that so fervently is kind of disturbing, because people who believe things without data are not reliable. But I do think that there's more to it, certainly, than it usually gets credit for. And some of that is due to Eliphas Levi. And I think I suspect, I don't know if there's direct evidence for this, but I suspect he was the one who first started integrating this into this system, because he was one of the people whose interpretations of the Enochian system became more influential to Western magic. We would have more information about this, but Levi was in France. The order that he founded was in France. When the Nazis invaded France during World War II, they destroyed a great deal of the record there and what happened there. And that's why the occult tradition that we work with now comes mostly out of England and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, because that's, England was invaded. That record did survive. And there were people like Aleister Crowley or Israel Regardie who decided, like, okay, we can't risk this stuff. We can't keep this secret anymore because we can't risk it getting lost like so much else has.
The Nazis deliberately seek to destroy esoteric.
Yeah, well, they were influenced by the occult a lot themselves, and they were occultists on their own thing. But yeah, they were very, very adamant about destroying competing orders and stuff like that. Although they used dowsing to try and find hidden ships or spy ships and stuff like that. So they were influenced by that in their own way. The final point that I would make about the minor arcana is the aces. In many ways, these are the most difficult cards to understand. And Crowley doesn't give them titles because they represent the root of each element. So when you see this come up in a reading, it's often very difficult to know how to interpret it. The way that people can engage it the best, certainly if they're going to do ceremonial magic, they're the root of the four elements. So our experience is doing the pentagram ritual, the greater pentagram ritual, where we invoke that particular element, and what sensations we come into, what visions we might have, what information we might experience when doing that, is going to reveal a great deal about the aces and what they mean, and how that kind of works out, basically. Trying to pin down what the root of an element is, I think the best way to do it is for someone to look at the rest of the cards in the suit and see how they, what is the unifying factor. And this comes back to what I initially said about looking for connections and training yourself to look for connections. Hopefully not in a way that you're finding them in insane places, but, and that, unfortunately that is a danger. Like when people start to see results using occult stuff like this, they sometimes start to, this monomania. Like, I know people who get into gematria and all of a sudden, every house number is now significant, every license plate is now significant. It's like, no, it's not. I mean, it is in the ultimate cosmic sense. If you are achieving samadhi and crossing the abyss, then totally it's all significant. But if you're just starting to get into some Kabbalistic techniques or whatever, you should probably calm down and just take a step back and wait until you've done some more yoga to start looking for meaning in license plates. So do we have questions?
Yeah, here's one. These various labels there from Crowley, is there a good source to just look them up? The ones you rattled off.
Oh, the Book of Thoth.
The Book of Thoth.
Yeah. And like I said, that's kind of one, and it is really, people complain because I think that honestly, people just don't have the vocabulary for Crowley a lot of the time, so that becomes a problem. But because it's one of his most lucid books, honestly. There's very little. It's at the point where he's completely jettisoned the idea of trying to make this mysterious to anyone. Because early in his work, he would hint around and have these little weird jokes or whatever. But now he's kind of tossed it.
Which deck does he recommend?
I would recommend the Thoth deck, but I would also recommend people work with different decks and see what gets the best result for them. I mean, in terms of explaining the universe and the system of Thelema, the Thoth deck is the best. But someone might get more accurate results in terms of trying to do divination for themselves and figure things out for themselves, depending on what deck they use and what system they use. And I think it's important to do that, to experiment. I mean, in Liber E they have an exercise where you're supposed to take your tarot deck and try to determine without looking at it what cards you have, and you measure the result. And the idea is to be able to come up with the stuff intuitively, or recognize the cards, just by the power of the mind. Which is, an interesting thing to do if you're going to record your experiments and see when you get more results. I've actually found that you can get decent results with that, although your brain gets tired very quickly. But we've also done it with partners, and where the other person looks at a card and I try to see what card they have or whatever. And so I had some very interesting things happen with one of my friends who uses this like Celtic fairy kind of deck that I don't really like, but it corresponds to the same thing with the tarot. And I would get images directly from the Thoth deck when I was looking at her card, and I would be able to accurately tell the card, but nothing that I was seeing was actually on her version of the card. So I think there is something to the idea that different systems can have different applications, and certainly like the rule behind everything is success is your proof. If something works and it gives you reliable information, then that's what you use, definitely.
Have you heard of, been told that the American intelligence use a form of divination?
Oh yeah, they mess around with that stuff all the time.
Yeah, but there's, I can't remember what they call it now.
Remote viewing.
That's right,
Right.
remote viewing. We actually did it in a class in Montreal with the guy who was teaching it to them. Yeah, very interesting. And it was done by a sort of what do you call it when you have a bunch of people and then you take the average of what they're giving out the information.
Statistic?
Huh?
Statistic or something like that?
Yes. So, yeah, it was quite fun. And so he did that with us, not telling us where, anything. And they've done it to such an extent to trick the conscious brain. And they get a computer to generate numbers which represent a particular time and place in history. And for us, I remember it was Hitler's bunker when he was committing suicide.
I think that those kind of experiments are interesting, and I am glad when people bother to bring real equipment into that kind of thing and look at it seriously, because you can actually get reliable results. And that's one of the things that Crowley actually has with his initial exams in the AA, just to get past the neophyte grade, is you give someone a symbol that they don't know what it is, and they have to actually investigate it, and then you judge whether their results have to do with that symbol reliably. And like that kind of accuracy is necessary, certainly for that order.
What about scrying? Because is scrying like similar to like geomancy and stuff like that? Because like the whole Enochian system comes from scrying.
Yeah.
So the whole part of this like comes through that. So
scrying is a word that literally, like, it could be used to apply to remote viewing. It could be used to apply to astral sight. It could be used to apply to stuff like what Kelly did. And it's in a way, it's a word that's kind of changed over time. Usually in ceremonial magic, when you're talking about the scryer, you're referring to a partner team like Dee and Kelly of magicians, where one is conjuring the spirit and the other is just looking at it and receiving it. Because it is really sometimes difficult to do both at once. It requires a totally different set of mental processes to do the ritual, and then to just totally, like, because you have to remember a lot of things, a lot of memorization, there's a lot of gestures, words, stuff like that. You have to really put yourself in the zone. And then when you're scrying, you really just have to blank, and sometimes it's hard to like go from one state of mind to the other very quickly. So just having someone whose job is just to sit there and see what happens, and that's all they have to do is just what happens, and that's all they have to do is just to sit there and see what happens. That's basically what happens there. But scrying is a word that could also be used for remote viewing or for astral work, yeah.
What do you know about the work? I've got to think of his name. Moody. Raymond Moody was doing about scrying and connecting that to an ancient Greek temple where they practiced this. They actually went underground. I forget how long the preparation was for that, but then they were led through a series of underground tunnels, very narrow, like a maze, and then it opened out into a rather large room where there was a big basin of that had oil in it, and the idea was you sat around the edge of the room. There was indirect light, and you looked into the oil of the basin, which is like a modern mirror,